Hello everyone, and welcome to the follow-up session for the second series of Future Labs. Thank you so much for joining these discussions, both the conversations themselves last week and this follow-up session today. The aim of the Future Labs is to open up the current conversations that are taking place across the industry to ensure freelance voices are heard in those discussions. The pandemic has hit the whole industry very hard, but freelancers are especially vulnerable due to the precarious nature of their work and being outside the traditional structures of decision-making and support, which is no less the case now as we go into a second lockdown. The proposed topics of discussion for the Future Labs were initially split into short, medium, and long-term focuses, and those were later refined into the three areas that we've split these discussions into, which are immediate support for freelancers, ensuring that as many as possible return to work as we reopen, and using this moment as an opportunity to address some of the existing issues in the industry. Many of the suggested topics came out of responses from the big Freelancer survey, which Freelancers Make Theatre Work conducted at the beginning of the lockdown, the first lockdown, and surveying over 8,000 freelancers, which led to the Routes to Recovery document, which you can find on our website. And the specific questions that these groups met to discuss last week were as follows. How do we protect the freelance backstage workforce, including technical and making professions, if we can't go back to work until next year? How can we provide support, ongoing training, and meaningful opportunities for the future freelance workforce? And how can we ensure that the freelance voice is heard in making the theatre that we come back to environmentally sustainable? The intended focus of all of these conversations is to find solutions to those questions, not simply to discuss the issues. However, we know that none of these questions can be answered in 2 hours. Not only could each of the discussions that we had last week have gone on for much longer, but often the best ideas happen in the time between meetings. That's why we've added these follow-up sessions to allow time for reflection, developed thinking, and further discussion, as well as an opportunity to present our thoughts and ideas. We also want to be able to open these conversations up to the wider theatre community, which is why we're sharing reports from the initial discussions and the final part of this session. So the plan for the rest of this meeting is for me to hand over to the chairs from each lab, who will feed back from their discussions. After that, we'll divide into breakout rooms to return to each conversation. And finally, we'll come back together to present ideas, commitments, conclusions, further questions, all of which will be graphically recorded by Julie and Miranda. Prior to this session, we asked each of you to contemplate your concluding thoughts around tomorrow, the next 6 months, and the next year. These ideas, commitments, final thoughts, they're not intended to be chiseled into stone for us to hold you to over those periods. They're simply intended to illustrate the actions that can be taken and the tapestry of individuals that make up that change. On which note, I will hand you over to your chairs, starting with Peter Mcintosh.
Hi, hello, everybody. The first Future Lab that we did last Monday, as Jack said, met around the question, how do we protect the freelance backstage workforce, including technical and making professions, if we can't go back to work until next year, which, given the latest news, is looking increasingly likely. We broke that down into two further provocations. The first one being, when programming, organizations should prioritize employment opportunities above everything else. How can they usefully and meaningfully do this for freelancers? So basically, how do producers think creatively to get as many people back into the building as they possibly can? And then social distancing means more caution around scale and quantity of projects. Given limited opportunities, how do we help engage freelancers, even if it means employing them in different ways? The conversation began about the landscape as it was a week ago, in terms of social distancing and people tentatively starting projects. Obviously, as I say, you know, since the news has changed, our conversation today will be all the more pertinent or difficult. One of the first observations was that many of the technicians and makers that we were talking about in our session depend on a trickle-down effect to get work. So they depend on designers or whoever else to promote them for work, or to give them work, I suppose. And the question is, how do we make sure we reach them? How do we provide that work for them? And another observation was that in this time, that we should focus on people and not stuff. So getting people back into buildings rather than huge budgets, although the notion of a huge budget, I think, in the short to medium term is going to be something fanciful. But equally, if you don't provide stuff, then you reduce work for the crafts people. So a catch-22 situation there. And I think these difficult situations come up a lot within our conversations. So also, if you're using budgets of any sort, or grants or bailouts to give freelancers work, how do you square that with the building and the people who have been laid off by that building, and what does that look like? Another almost impossible question to square, but something that we should all be very aware of in terms of the how the landscape progresses. Then we moved on to freelancers who are already leaving the business. There's, I'm sure all of us know people who are at least finding temporary work, but I had a personal experience that a production manager was looking for stage management and couldn't get anybody to commit for a short-term contract because they wouldn't be able to go back to the job that they need to survive, the Tesco job or whatever. So there's a whole world of how do we work around people who've taken on short-term, taken on jobs, get them back in. How do we not write those people off if they weren't available the first time? Just don't just say, oh, they've moved on somewhere else. So be a constant awareness that people still want to work if they possibly can, but right in this moment, and increasingly at this time, that's it's very difficult to not be able to pay the bills, or to have to leave a job and then find another one. Equally, also, some of those people who have found found new jobs, whether they be working in supermarkets or anything else, are actually enjoying their new stress-free lives and thinking very carefully about what the world that they come back into looks like. And one of the provocations that came up in our meeting was, perhaps if we can't do anything else, we can concentrate in the now on what our workplace looks like when we do come back, so that it's adaptable and as pleasant a place to come back to as it can possibly be. I mean, I know that's a stretch, but all of these things, having the time, that's what FMTW came about because of, having the time to think about these things and to make these suggestions and to empower ourselves to be able to speak up and suggest them. That moves us on to, we talked about connecting the freelance workforce, which again is kind of what FMTW started to do. And one of the really good ideas I think that came up was to maybe, we talked about, it's not just about giving people jobs, giving people money, but also reminding them of the skills that they have, giving them back a pride in what they do and hope, and maybe asking theatres to take a responsibility for mentoring schemes or upskilling the freelance workforce in this time. And the suggestion was maybe that in a kind of joined up thinking way, we try and connect all of the theatres. A lot of these theatres are having these conversations on their own or next to each other, but there is no one yet saying, why don't we all do this together? Why don't we make this a thing? Why doesn't, for example, every Thursday morning become this thing? This freelancers come into the building or don't come into the building. We have a Zoom, but it's a countrywide thing that we sign up to in a funny little way. You know, we're already doing that a bit with FMTW, with things like tea breaks that are, again, tentative ways of connecting people back into the workforce and the workplace, to talk with each other and share their experiences. And that, for a lot of people, means as much right now as anything else. Where were we? We also talked about diversifying. So some of the people in our group who run workshops were talking about diversifying their job specs so that they take on work in other industries or on other projects. So again, in the short term and mid-term, to at least keep their freelancers busy and working. And I think if there's a bigger way of thinking about that you know, within theatres and organisations, that would also be a good thought. And finally, I think, oh no, and then we talked about going back to in the time that we have now to think about things, a big focus on how much we all get paid, or sorry, how little we all get paid. And the idea maybe of rate cards, which has come up in various other groups, or certainly of being more vocal about the fact that we can't go backwards in terms of fees. They can't be, you know, they can't go down from where they are. They can only go up. I mean, they must only go up. So that was, and rate cards came up as a way of perhaps joining the dots between all sorts of freelance groups, so that, you know, when everybody sits backstage in a tech and has those conversations, they're not embarrassing or awkward or whatever. And finally, but this one's, I mean, it's a biggie right now, is to, you know, the way that we can really get people back to work is to get the theatres back open again, and how we put pressure on people or inspire people, or I want to say tickle people really to be brave, to think outside the box, to make work where they can, when they can. And it's harder for the bigger organizations because they have permanent staff to think about. They can't move so fleetly afoot. And I'm sure, you know, all of these buildings who in the last week have had to close their theatres today are feeling that very, very much. So that is the obvious one, and it's the one that we feel like it was the strongest part of the conversation that we had in our group last week, which was really, we need to get the theatres back open again, and we need to get people thinking about how that can happen in a way that is safe and but also imaginative. I will leave it there.
Brilliant, thank you, Peter. I will pass the conversation over to Aaron to feedback from the second discussion.
Hi everybody, I'm Aaron, and I chaired the session last Wednesday, and we gathered around the question of how can we provide support, ongoing training and meaningful opportunities for the future freelance workforce. We looked at how organisations can support graduates and early career freelancers and give them more agency to identify as artists or practitioners within their chosen discipline. Some of the solutions proposed where creative societies are looking at ways to make the kickstart scheme work and to develop a practical model on how freelancers may be able to take part in that scheme. Looking at mentorship schemes and looking at how established artists can either mentor early career or mid-career artists, looking at, mid-career artists also getting mentorship. We also identified actually that the associations are a really good place to start this and look at networking, building communities and support freelancers to connect with each other. Another solution was associateships with designers within theatres, and we also touched a little bit on apprenticeships. Some of the general points that we explored were looking at entry level and routes into the industry, and what does that look like, and who hasn't trained into the traditional route, so not going through a university or drama school, for example, and looking at the terminology around that, because not everyone is a graduate, and actually what can these opportunities do to also look at those people that are not looking at those traditional routes and not come from a theatre background, which would also have a massive impact in diversifying our workforce. So looking at that terminology and also making sure that we're not using emerging and looking at across terminology across all organisations, so it's all in sync. One of the solutions that came out of our Future Lab session was that Amy Leach, who I don't think is on the call today, but at Leeds Playhouse, they are looking at opportunities for people to shadow and observe their productions for the entire process and get an understanding of actually what backstage roles entail and what actually what they do. And then hopefully that will then come into looking at traineeships and things like that within their organisation. And we also touched upon the fact that actually creating these opportunities and ongoing training shouldn't be new roles within the organisation or anyone's team. For example, a designer taking on an assistant shouldn't necessarily be replacing someone. It should be a new role in addition to their team, and making sure that actually we're not taking someone else's job to create a new opportunity. These opportunities and ongoing training sessions, often graduates and early career freelancers have had to have free placements to build up their skills and contacts as well as experience to actually get their foot in the door. And actually what these opportunities and training as well as support should be actually paid for that freelancer's time and their skills. We also spoke about the development of our skills and not just being looking at as freelancers and within our discipline, but actually everything that freelancers entail. And that's down to budgeting, funding, fees, networking, and also how to build your own project. And often early career freelancers don't have this information to hand or know where to go. Wesley has been doing some work with Dance Space, which creates an opportunity for early career dancer to be taken through the whole process, creating their own first piece of work. And they are supported by a professional team, and they also take them through the process step by step, so they really understand actually what it entails to create their work. We looked at organisations and the responsibilities of organisations and what they should be providing for the freelancers. And we actually identified that organisations should also be responsible in helping that freelancer get their next job. And what we mean by this is actually not applying for the job for themselves, but in fact actually arming that freelancer up with the skills and benefits of building that person, so that freelancer can actually benefit from being in that organisation, and the organisations are not just benefiting from that freelancer just doing that work, whereas the organisation is actually really investing in some time in that freelancer, so they come out of that organisation with more skills. We also looked at the industry as a whole, and actually as an industry, we are handing down practices, and in reality, what we should be doing is handing over practices, and not handing over practices, sorry, and handing over power to young people to create art and developing new practices, which will then help towards early career freelancers having more agency to identify as an artist or practitioner. This sparked questions around actually how do we bridge that gap to get people through the doors of the organisation, and how do we get freelancers to feel confident to be able to do this? Similarly to the first lab, we looked at actually how organisations can share information across each other and making sure that actually the shared opportunities from across the whole country, and people know about those opportunities, so then they can also create communities and space. We touched upon a little bit about mid-career artists, and often mid-career artists sometimes get stuck in categories. For example, if they've just worked in children's theatre, that's their kind of category, and actually how can we create opportunities for them to move on within their career. And just a few things to highlight. Some of the organisations we identified actually shouldn't just be creating opportunities, they should actually be asking the freelancers what they want, and what can that opportunity do for that freelancer for their needs, and making a bespoke opportunity. So actually it's really for the freelancer, not just for the organisation ticking a box to say that they've had an opportunity. And doing some long-term thinking for organisations to create opportunities that for projects which may not happen in 2 years' time. So actually they've got real time to develop with that freelancer, and nothing's getting rushed, and there's some real time for actual support and not actually just thinking about the end product, but really getting involved within the whole process. And also thinking outside the box of these opportunities and what are these opportunities offering and why, and whether or not these opportunities are just feeding back into the existing structures or hierarchies, which we know don't work and we want change. And I guess what we'll probably look at today, and we didn't really get touched upon, is what is a meaningful opportunity for a freelancer. And so that just gives you a quick overview of the lab. And I presume, like every other lab last week, we only touched the surface of the conversation. So I look forward to continuing our conversation today.
Thank you, Aaron. Finally, I'll hand over to Emma Jane to report back from the third discussion.
Thanks, Jack. So on Friday, we gathered around the question, how can we ensure the freelance voice is heard in making the theatre that we come back to environmentally sustainable? And the conversation centred on thinking at a macro level and asking how we can ensure individuals feel responsible and take personal responsibility whilst recognising really clearly that it's only through collective working and developing a lived culture of sustainability that will actually make the urgent change that is really desperately needed in both the industry and society. Some of the solutions that came up were ensuring that 100% of the workforce is trained in carbon literacy, supporting carbon literacy training and the development of sustainability policy throughout the supply chain and reaching out to people to do that. Organisations that don't meet their sustainability aims need to face financial accountability. We need active, visible and common commitments and goals between cultural leaders that can be referred to regularly to avoid stagnancy and develop a system of accountability. Investing in active local partnerships, with an example being the work done in Manchester. We could reference the process of how health and safety became part of our entire culture of working and adapt and then follow that process. We should make sustainability a rolling agenda point at every production meeting, board meeting and team meeting, so it's always part of the conversation. The possible development of a buddy scheme where we can kindly and generously hold each other to account or support each other with challenges. We need to pay freelancers to implement more sustainable practices so that they can train, research and work meaningfully to embed those practices in everything they do and shift the culture. We should contractually implement that design needs to be at least 50% sustainable. We can celebrate and encourage collaborative practice so that we move through making sets and design sustainable together and using our collective brain. We could have a quota of shows that focus on talking about climate change every season. And the shows that we create that are not explicitly about the climate crisis can subtly reference sustainability throughout within the text, the movement, the subtext, or any other factor. We could make a commitment to getting back to, I've written here Ceilidh, by which I mean the traditional form of Ceilidh, which was like sitting around a campfire and telling stories. So basically we can get back to simple storytelling and the traditions that inspired theatre. Short form, we can just have less stuff. Carbon literacy training could be incorporated into institutional training and the education process, and it could also be offered by unions and other representative organisations. We could pay a number of freelance associates to be sustainability associates within organisations, so their focus is there to develop practices that influence the work as opposed to just making work. And we can commit to coming together to talk about these things more consistently. We can share more, share each other's buildings more, and become focused on sharing, storing and reusing things like costumes immediately. We can be more effective and efficient with shared storage between local organisations and develop thorough databases so we're not doubling up where we don't need to, and create our venues as community hubs so that the audiences and local community we're engaging with witness a lived sustainable practice and we can let that filter into our communities. And lastly, this is one of my personal favourites, if our older buildings are adding to our carbon footprint because they're not built with sustainability in mind and we're not allowed to change them because they're listed, we can just go rogue and do it anyway because it's more important than saving an old building. Some things that people want to think on further, This can no longer be optional. It has to be the lens through which we see and consider everything we do. The conversation around measurement and control is easier to have. We need to start talking about how this impacts our creativity. There needs to be clearer communication to freelancers about where the conversation's at and how they join it. We need to avoid creating Uber organizations to deal with this, as it lets individuals off the hook and closes the conversation down with bureaucracy. And we need to consider how we can push this conversation with kindness and not shame. Questions that came out of the session include: the idea of training and working in a grassroots manner takes time. We don't have time, so what do we do? Why are the organisations and movements that already exist not working? Why is the conversation not joining up in spite of attempts to do so? How do we work with audiences to reduce their travel footprint and their carbon footprint? How do we avoid getting distracted by the small differences we can easily make and continue to pursue the things that have the greatest impact? Would it be more sustainable for us to facilitate co-created community work instead of working towards carbon-intensive touring? And lastly, why do we value fast, big, loud, international, and full of stuff? What if we invest more in the conversations about the work we need to make and simplify it? And I'll hand back to you there, Jack.
Thank you, Emma-Jane. Thank you, all three of you. Whilst they were feeding back from the discussions, I've assigned you all to breakout rooms to continue the conversations, after which we'll come back together to share our final thoughts. The chairs will allow for breaks during this discussion, so do feel free to take them. Touch wood, this will work seamlessly, but I'll be holding the fort in the main room, so let me know if you have any problems. Otherwise, I'll see you after the follow-up conversations. Hello, welcome back, everyone. I hope your follow-up conversations were full of good thoughts and ideas. I'm welcoming Julia Miranda into the Zoom, who will be graphically recording this last section. She's waving now. You should be able to see that spotlit on your Zoom screens. In this final part, we're going to bring these three discussions to a close by presenting our concluding ideas, takeaways, personal commitments, any final thoughts. Prior to this session, we asked everyone to base those final thoughts around tomorrow, the next 6 months, and the next year. But as an additional provocation, I think the following questions are quite useful. What can we do within the parameters that we are working in right now? And if you have resources and agency, what could you be doing specifically? As I said at the start, we hope that these might illustrate the actions that we can take and the network of individuals that make up those changes. I'll hand back over to each chair and then they will hand over to individual panelists. I'll start with Peter Mcintosh.
Hello. Am I to say what we just talked about? We had a lovely little, it's like a coffee morning actually, gathering. And something that we talked about in our first session actually, which was connecting with each other as freelancers. And almost everybody in my room I'd worked with. So it was really lovely to connect with people I've worked with. And I can heartily recommend you all picking a few people to just connect with in this next 4 weeks, when people will feel more vulnerable and more separate from the world that we work in, just when things were looking a little bit more optimistic. We talked mostly about the things we talked about before, and the really big ask from this, our little session, was a little bit of joined up thinking from the theatre community in terms of representatives, providing information about what may well be happening and joining up together to I suppose come up with some rules about when we might open or what we are doing in order to do that. We've never really, and I know lots of people have had this conversation, had a given spokesperson for the theatre community, or any handful of given spokespeople. It's been sadly lacking, I think, in that way, or a continuity of that, if I may even say that. So that's what we would like. Our little room thought would just ongoing information about what's happening and how it might happen and what the plans are, and to get everybody to talk to each other, because there seems to be not a great deal of that at the moment either. I'm going to hand over first to Sharon Foley, and then Chris Marcus, and then, where is she? Sarah Bowen, if she's still in the room. Sharon. Ooh.
Hello. Well, what I've picked up over these Zoom meetings, the last couple in a couple of weeks, was that I think it's given us a chance, commercial, in-house and freelance, to kind of like mix and match more. And I think, as Peter said, we need to kind of keep communicating now for the future. We've had this little big blip, where we've had the chance to kind of pick up, whereas not rushing around, we're not all doing shows all the time, that we need to kind of like just have a conversation, pick the phone up more, use each other for resources, you know, ideas, chats, contacts, whatever. I think we need to kind of be more, yes, joined up as a theatre, as a community, the theatre community. I think it lacks a lot of that, really, because we're very, very busy, all of us. But sometimes we're not busy, and sometimes we get the feeling that maybe, you know, we're probably fallen off the side of a cliff or something. But I think that would be a good thing. And I think that notion that freelance is not as important as people who are in-house or people who are in the commercial world, I think needs to go as well, because we are all important and we all have skills that we need to bring to the centre. And I think it's just great that we can keep in communication with each other. And I think, from what we talked about last week with apprenticeships, we've been looking into that quite seriously, and there's quite a massive government incentive now to take on people as an apprentice, and I think that's what theatre needs. It needs to keep those fantastic skills going, and we need to start with the young. It doesn't have to be 16-year-olds, it could be 16. I mean, there's no reason you need to go to college to do it, but 16, 18, even if you're 24, 25, 30, 40, we just need to keep the skills within this country, keep the work in this country, and just try and be stronger because of it, and not rely on you know, one thing. Just keep a circle going. That's my thoughts.
Thank you, Sharon. Chris.
I've realised a lot. I've not been part of many of these Zoom conversations I've been having, and I've realised a lot how much support and care and concern there are within a lot of the institutions. And I talked about this at the end in the closing last week, but I'm wondering how much of these conversations are happening within the commercial sector, which I work in, which I think is really important. And I'm wondering, yeah, whether we're going to come back in the commercial world to things being the same, or whether people will have thought as much about all of these issues that clearly the institutions have. And there's also a lot of clear conversations about training and mentorship and supporting people, which are obviously also really important, and whether these conversations are all going to continue, and how we can continue them, and how we all continue having these conversations, so that hopefully we can make things better in the future, and this isn't just a thing that happened over an 8-month period while this was going on, and we actually do go back to things, continuing these conversations.
Thanks, Chris. Sarah. B.
I just think I reiterate what Sharon said about communication. We definitely took quite a lot from that last week. But as I've said before, our costume department is small at the E&O, so we rely 50% plus a lot of the time on freelancers. So we're trying to keep them updated, even though the news isn't always great. It's just good to keep them in the loop. And also something I just shared earlier was that me and Christina, who's the head of costume here, said that we were going to try and link up with the other big theatre houses, similar scale to us and bigger, like the Opera House and the National, and say when we're asked to keep a budget down, that we try to keep our freelancers and our big bulk makes UK based, and we're not tempted, just because our budgets are bound to shrink a little, that we still keep it UK based and keep as many of our freelance friends in business as possible.
Thanks,
Really.
Sarah. Vicky, you were in our group beforehand. Do you want to pop in here?
I guess I think something about the completeness of the community that everybody's talked about. It was incredibly heartening to hear both the Sarahs talking from inside buildings last week about how thoughtful and aware they are of the freelancer situation as things stand. And I sort of hadn't really sort of heard that at first. I sort of hoped that might be there, but it was great to hear it firsthand, and also to think about how, Sarah, I remember you talking about embedding, continuing fee agreements into budget thinking, and that actually you were, because of your closeness to the freelancer community, you were passing that up into the organisation. And I was thinking that's a brilliant sort of act of solidarity and generosity to your freelance colleagues, but also that's kind of interesting because it seems to me it demonstrated how close you are to your freelance colleagues in a way that senior management and some of the decision makers sometimes aren't, and wondering sort of really what that means in terms of having an impact more broadly for freelancers.
I think it's just I think people are so desperate to get into theatre. What worries us is that they'll do it for any money, if they're offered it. And I think, we need to communicate that we're not gonna, we don't want to do that. We don't want to do that anyway. So we want him back in theatre. But
thanks,
yeah.
Back to you, Jack.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you all of you for those thoughts. I'll hand over to Aaron for his groups.
Thank you, Jack. Some very similar thoughts in our group about joined up thinking, organisations learning from others, and communication. One of the things that have come out of our group is actually having a group kind of subgroup from this Future Labs and meeting monthly to check in with each other, but also inviting others as well as part of that, so we can check in and have that dialogue between organisations and freelancers. We also felt that actually there's 3 strands to the communication side. It's actually organisations speaking to other organisations as one strand. Another strand is freelancers talking together to each other. And then the third strand is actually both of those organisations and freelancers coming together to speak about their experiences. And actually that's something that we'll try and work on, to have a subgroup to move forward out of this lab, to try and work out and be realistic. Actually, every month will probably be easier and doable for people to commit to coming and sharing their thoughts, and also looking at sustaining the pressure on senior level and government level about these opportunities as well, and working together to try and create some kind of opportunities. May that be the kickstart scheme. I can never say that. So yeah, as well. So I'm going to hand over to Nikki Shaw.
Hi, thank you, Aaron. Yeah, no, it was a great conversation, and never enough time, but then maybe that's good because it just gets one thinking. I just wanted to share actually Martin Bright, who was in our group from Creative Society. I'm sure he won't mind his email being shared with everyone, but maybe we should just check that, Aaron. But he specifically, he sort of felt like he was slightly an interloper because he runs an organisation that is trying to get apprenticeship style jobs and start them with freelancers. And I sort of said to him, I personally will have a conversation with him because to sort of even be a guinea pig as to how that might be. But that could be for all jobs in theatre. When we spoke last week, I sort of said, well, I didn't want to replace existing assistants that I might use who were highly trained and skilled, and sort of want to talk to him further about what it would mean bringing in someone who's, he said they wouldn't be younger than 18, they'd need to be an adult, and creating a new job and how that might be, but that his company would get the funding for that, so that person would be paid. And I sort of want to talk to him about whether there could be some money for the person having that apprentice, because as we know, when you have an unskilled person, it requires a lot of your time, and then you're not producing work yourself. But he was a really interesting man, so I just wanted to share that with everyone. And then yes, concurring, I think probably all the groups covered sort of similar things, but I was just, because it's something I think about myself, how one has large ambition. There's lots of things I personally want to do at the moment, but just sort of remembering to start small, and to share what one's doing with other people and say, well, I've managed to do this, could you do the same? And that's what we were sort of talking about between the freelancers in our room and the people who are in buildings. And so I am literally going to start a couple of, I did a little trial project myself in September, October, that I wanted to do in a theatre, and went ahead with it anyway. So I think, again, Sarah, what you were saying about just getting on with things anyway is great. So yeah, I think that's probably enough from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikki. I'm going to hand over to Mimi.
Yeah, similarly, again, we I think sort of as in our groups, I sort of was talking about how I kind of keep getting stuck on this sort of notion that where I'm kind of based in an organisation, and so I'm able to sort of be a bit of a conduit and step back and listen really to what freelancers need in this moment. But also we started talking about joining up these conversations again with sort of senior management, and the conversation towards the government again about how we kind of make sure we specifically build an effort to retain as many people within the industry as possible, speaking specifically to people who fell, you know, through the cracks in the schemes that were set up before. And as we kind of move into this next phase, really being realistic about where we're going to be able to be in 2, 3, 4 months' time. So again, like I think in that sense, identifying what my role is within this, I'm really keen to keep speaking to freelancers, as many freelancers as possible, and keeping that conversation open to understand what you need. And that the challenge for me is to, you know, kind of do as much as I can to make that happen, and being from within inside an organisation as well, ensuring that those messages are getting through to leadership in terms of how we're planning for the next 12 to 18 months. I think that covers everything I wanted to say.
Thank you, Mimi. Andy?
Yeah, thanks for such a stimulating couple of chats to the group that I was in. I guess there's 2 things that are on my mind after today's discussion. At the first meeting, I kind of mentioned that because I work in youth theatre environments, but as well as drama schools and then the profession, I sort of see how in that kind of, I suppose, journey or timeline of where an early career artist travels, there's a lot of passing the buck. There's a lot of theatres saying, you know, the problems around representation in amongst early career artists, or financial support, whatever the problem is, they hand down to drama schools, and drama schools hand down to youth theatres and schools, and people don't confront the problem head on at their level all the time. And so I think in the immediate, like in those organisations that I work with, I'm just going to try and kind of correct that that narrative a little bit and try and encourage people to do the work, even if they think it's another organisation's responsibility. And I know the joined up thinking thing has come up a lot, but I suppose specifically on the issue of early career artists, it just feels like there's already some structures in place where drama schools or theatres who employ graduates should be speaking to each other. There's already, you know, consortiums of drama schools. There's already theatre, you know, education and engagement departments. And so, you know, I don't think it is revolutionary in the next 6 months to try and get those sort of consortiums together to try and address some of those problems. And just a specific example that I gave in our meeting last week, there's a refugee theatre company that I work with from time to time, and a group of its participants who have done theatre projects for the first time in their lives are now thinking of becoming professional actors. And I sent an email to a drama school I work at regularly and arranged for a group of them to have free auditions and free travel to those auditions. And I suppose what I'm thinking off the back of our meetings is, you know, what if that was easier? What if me as an individual freelancer could identify those early career artists who need support and send an email not to one drama school, but to the consortium of drama schools that are going to share resources and improve access. And so that's just one example, I think, of where the joined up thinking could make life a lot easier for a lot more people.
Thank you, Andy. Rajiv?
Thank you, Aaron. So I've been looking at what's next in my own career, as well as what's next for future industries, future freelancers coming into the career itself. And I've been lucky to have given the opportunity to work with my drama school again in promoting their next stages of their career, or their designs and their careers, and like the roles that they're going through. And with the additional 2 new roles that they're bringing on to help push forward this, to just get a better idea of what the industry is actually looking for and what we have always been working to, in terms of lighting designers, assistant lighting designers, programmers for them, for the designers themselves. With the 2 new roles that they put in, it's how I work with them. And that's just been my main focus on how I can help pass on my experience, how I didn't have any of those roles when I was there, but I knew about them, to just pass on all my experience to them. But also, if there are venues that are looking for like mentorships into certain areas, then definitely I'm sure most freelancers are happy to pass on their knowledge and skills in one-on-one meetings, just to keep everyone in the industry going, we can get back into this. It's just a matter of when.
Thank you, Rajiv. Amy, Roger?
Hi, yeah. I think thank you to my group. It was amazing chatting to you all, and hopefully chat to you all again next month. It'd be great. Really committed to that working group. I think it would be great. And I think just committing to communicating more and kind of opening as many communication channels as possible. I've been working quite closely with the new Association of Scenic Artists and Makers, and I'm kind of committed to kind of opening those communication channels in kind of my little sector, as well as over kind of the wider group, and trying to be playful with those communications as well, kind of not making it all about working and changing as much as that needs to happen, but also making it fun and kind of allowing each other to just help each other in this kind of crazy time that we're in at the moment. But yeah, I think that's all from me.
Thank you, Amy. And Alistair?
Yeah, just to reiterate what the whole group said, it's been really lovely, and thank you for everyone's time. And then also to reiterate the joined up thinking idea, and it's just been really lovely to hear, especially last week, some really amazing examples of practice from some people and freelancers and organizations, and that's been really nice. And then I suppose just kind of considering, as well as joined up thinking, more of a joined up awareness of how we as organizations have a knock-on effect to each other. So how we deal and engage with freelancers and artists affects another organization, or at least how the freelancer engages with them, etc. So just being aware of that, and being aware of how we can creatively entitle freelancers in a time where maybe they are not feeling as creatively entitled and other people are not. But also, I suppose one joy of this pandemic, if there is any joys, are that, you know, groups like this have come out of it and people have been more connected than ever before. And I suppose as we move into, in the future, next year or whenever, a less digital world, how do we still continue that connection? How do we continue that access to people that have seemed inaccessible? Is really important for me. And then also just something I'm thinking about is when a freelancer engages with your organization, how do you help them secure the next job? So what other opportunities do you provide alongside the brief to upskill them or to entitle them or to give them a leap to the next job so they can hopefully come back in the future and work with you again? But yeah, it's been really lovely. Thank you for inviting us along.
Thank you, Alistair. And that's all, Jack. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. And finally, I'll hand back over to Emma Jane and her group.
Great. Thanks, Jack. Basically, all I need to say is that there are just as many notes from the short conversation we just had as they were from the Future Lab itself. So we're just getting really good at saying loads in a short time. And with that, I'll hand over to the people from the group to summarise some of that. So if we go B, then Gemma, then Sarah to start us off.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Emma, and thank you in general, Freelancers Make Theatre Work, for this opportunity. We were talking today about how it's just really incredible, specifically within the kind of sustainable theatre world, to have a space in which a freelancer's voice is as important as someone from a really large organisation. So thank you so much. I'd really prepared my thoughts way too intensely, but I prepared them around the challenges that were set or the commitments, and I was thinking, if I commit to anything as a result from our two conversations tomorrow, I'd commit to challenge and encouraging the venues I'm currently working with to make sustainability commitments or riders, and if they don't already have one, say, that's fantastic, can I work with you to help create one? In 6 months, I would like to have really offered whatever I could as a freelancer to the leading organisations within the sustainability theatre field, such as Julie's Bicycle and Creative Carbon Scotland, and said, here's what I can do, can I help you at all? Because I love what you're doing. To kind of help create, as we were discussing today, a sort of more kind of horizontal structure for working towards sustainable theatre. And then in 1 year, I would really like to have worked out how to best share my practices and my methods within my company with other theatre makers completely freely and in a way that others can just take and use what we've developed. To help other freelancers kind of get, just use what we've already started to figure out. Thanks so much.
Hi. Huge topic, and we've only literally started scraping the surface. We could probably sit in that group for hours and hours and just keep going. It's really difficult to hone it down, but if I was to think about sort of commitments, I mean, I'm very lucky to work in a company that is already committed to sustainability. We have champions on the board, we have champions in the company, so we're already quite far along the road. So what I'm looking for our company as freelancers to come to us with that commitment. And I guess what I'm looking after these sessions, I'm now looking at how I get that commitment from freelancers. And one of the things I want to do is have much more visibility on our website so that freelancers coming to us can see what we're already doing, so they don't, so they can see what sort of company we are before they start working with. And we already have contracts that have a commitment to 50% sustainable designs, and that includes lighting and sound and all those sort of stuff. I'm actually thinking now of putting that up a bit because it's proving much more interesting conversation than I thought it was, and everybody's really committed to that. So, and I'd also like to look at contracts of other freelancers like our stage management and our technical team, and have the same commitment in there, and have the same, you know, like we ask people to commit to our health and safety policy, I'd like to have the same thing for our environmental policy. So that would all become part of the paperwork that we swap between freelancers when we contract. And that's something I'll start doing straight away. And I think for next year, for over the next year, for me, it's about conversations between ourselves, between freelancers, between organizations, companies, which we've already kind of started doing in Scotland, but there's a lot of chat to do around the sharing of resources, and that involves a buy-in from all the freelancers as well. It's not just the companies and stuff, but it's a discussion with freelancers and set builders, and I think there's some very exciting out of the box thinking to be done there in our community. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Gemma. We'll go Sarah, then Polly, then Paul.
Great. Yeah, it was a really fascinating conversations, and I think one of the thing that kept coming up was to do with communication. For me, how are we communicating with, as freelancers, with the companies that we're working with audiences, with actors? How do people know what we are doing and what we're not doing? Between the two sessions, I did put a thing on my website of like, okay, making sure I've got a list of commitments. And there was an interesting thing today that Paulie said about our fear of failure in terms of commitments, because I so hovered over the sentence. I'd written nothing goes to landfill, and I thought about my recent projects, and I'm quite good at most things, but the zero nothing, I don't know whether I can commit to that. And there was a thing of, well, these things feel impossible, making these targets, but is it more, do we learn more by saying, yes, I'm going to commit for that moonshot, and actually I'm going to say, I didn't make it on this project, here's the things I did throw away, can I learn more from what I did fail on, rather than saying, oh, I can't say that, I'm going to say I can get most things not in landfill. Do we make the commitments and then be open and transparent about how we're failing? So that was really interesting. But yeah, thank you, it's been wonderful.
Is that me, EJ? Okay, I have had this amazing gift from this conversation, because I keep wrestling with the question of why we keep failing and why there's so many attempts to have the sustainability conversation. And I've also had this terrible guilt about all the time I've been putting into Freelancers Make Theatre Work and how it's been putting the sustainability conversation on hold. And I realise, fuck, it's the same thing. 70% of the industry are outside of the decision-making process. We feel disempowered. Oh God, my internet's gone again. So we, the freelancers, feel disempowered, and the buildings feel an obligation to impose. And that's all where the problem sits. And the more that we have conversations like this, the better it will be, because, you know, even Gemma talking about, I want the freelancers to be the same. So we need to join up. And the more we do that, the more it will be a shared topic, like everything, like all of this. So that's the gift. Thank you very much. My immediate conversation is that I'm going to challenge Sarah and Igor to come to an APTAL meeting with me, and we're going to suggest to APTAL that we create green riders for every discipline, backstage, everywhere. We should just get everyone to be creating green riders. My next provocation after that is, and we continue these conversations, but that's how we should do it immediately. I want to encourage the National to take on carbon literacy for all of the senior management team, as well as everyone else, and to introduce green champions. And I want them to take a public risk with how they articulate their commitment to a sustainable future publicly. That's it.
Great. We'll go Paul, then Jamie, then Igor. Sorry, Paul, you've come straight in after Polly's challenged you. You don't.
Well, I don't have to say anything now. She set the challenges. It's my job to meet them. Well, and actually, so after much prodding from both Paulie and Igor, our carbon literacy training is definitely high on my radar now. It was like, as Gemma up in Scotland, you know, as an organisation, we've been doing quite a lot, and that's one of the things that's been on the back burner. And I think it's going to come to the fore in the next. So in the next few weeks, I'm going to really start looking at it. I'm just going back onto furlough again, so I can do that. And then in the next 6 months, I hope that we can start rolling it out. And if people are still on furlough, up until that point, we can start rolling it out while people are at home. Yeah, I get it about the senior managers, but given everything else going on at the moment, they might be focusing somewhere else. But what I would like to do in a year, then within the year, is because we've got the benefit of scale and budget currently to a degree, and to be slightly less inward looking, and now having this conversation with freelancers, that if we're doing carbon literacy training, perhaps we can roll that out to the freelancers that work with us, you know, to some of those thousands of people in a year that are on our payroll for various reasons, being on tours and transfers and everything. And perhaps, you know, it's not just within the organization, within the building, that we can share it, because we have that benefit of scale. Yes, so that's what's come out of it, and it's been a really wonderful time, actually, a really great conversation to be having. Great to be able to talk to a lot of other people.
Thank you. We'll jump to you, Igor, and then Jamie, if you want to come in after, you are welcome to.
Yeah, it's been great, hasn't it? I've really enjoyed it, and it is, the big challenge is to find a way to make things of this nature sustain once the industry is back up and working, because making space for things like this sometimes is hard, but it feels really important, and it's been massively inspiring, because what you become aware of is the fact that people are doing stuff, like people are taking action. And of course, you know, much of the time they're doing it quietly and privately in their own sphere. But you know, if you could plot it on a map, you would see lots of little bubbles of action and hope and forward movement, which I think would be really inspiring. So if we can find ways to share that more widely, we could probably inspire other people. Like, one of the things that I've got out of this is that, you know, Paulie and Yols was talking about the training that the Centre for Alternative Technology do, which I've now signed up for, because the whole sustainability issue feels like there's lots to learn. And then once you've learned that, you can feel more confident, you know, getting out there and prodding people and taking the conversation into each organization that you work with. So that's my next steps, is to take my tiny agency and prod people with it in a really nice way. Thank you, Igor. Janie Carter has just rejoined the group, so I'm just going to give you an opportunity to feed in your final thoughts if you would like to.
Yeah, sure. So I was thinking more of the sort of the tomorrow, the next 6 months and the next year sort of points. I think for me as a company manager in a theatre, my focus for tomorrow is on well-being and mental health support to the people that I work with. Everyone I employ is freelance. I offered 16 people a job on Thursday, and then on Monday I had to tell them that it's postponed. So for me, the immediate thing is to support their mental health tomorrow, check in with them again, see how they're doing. And really that is the same over the next 6 months, over winter, to keep in touch with those people that have looked into getting other work, and support them and encourage them to stay connected and not feel that they're losing their confidence at a job that they're brilliant at. So it's to encourage that. And again, the same over the next year is to encourage them to come back to the industry, come back, make sure that they feel confident that they're good at their job, they still have those skills, and support them coming back to work so they don't feel out of the loop. They still feel part of the theatre family. So for me, it's all about the well-being of people that I work with who are all freelancers. Thank you.
Thank you, Janie. And thank you everyone again for taking part in these conversations and for joining us today. Thank you in particular to our three chairs, Peter Mcintosh, Aaron Pallen and Emma Jane Park, and to Julia Miranda for graphic note taking. And thank you to Arts Council England for funding and supporting the Future Labs. We'll be sharing the work from all of the Future Labs in our newsletter and on FMTW's website, which is www.freelancersmaketheatrework.com. If you would like to continue to respond to any of these conversations, please do feel free to email me. The email address is hello@freelancersmaketheatrework.com. And on that note, I hope you all enjoy the rest of your days and that the rest of your day, as in today, not your days. Goodness. And that we'll see each other again soon. And all that's left now is the customary Zoom waves.